Have you ever noticed how the most valuable lessons often arrive disguised as detours? Meet Juniper, not your typical retiree. At 72, she wasn't knitting, bird watching, or joining shuffleboard tournaments. Juniper was learning to tango. Not gracefully, mind you. More like a slightly arthritic flamingo attempting flight. But she was learning. Every misstep, every awkward stumble was a lesson etched into her memory. Juniper had always been a creature of habit, a woman who thrived on routine and predictable patterns. For 45 years, she'd meticulously managed the accounts at a small family-owned hardware store in rural Wisconsin. Her life was a well-balanced ledger, debits neatly matching credits. Colorful, yes, if you consider beige colorful. Then, the hardware store closed. The owners, the Peterson brothers, finally decided to retire themselves. Juniper, suddenly adrift, felt the familiar shores of her life receding faster than she could swim. Panic set in. What did one do when the familiar script of life was ripped up and tossed into the wind? The answer, it seemed, was tango. She saw an advertisement for a beginner's class at the local community center. Tango, find your rhythm. Her rhythm had vanished with the closing of the Petersons' hardware. But something about the image of the dancers, their bodies locked in an intricate embrace, the fire in their eyes drew her in. It was a challenge, a leap into the unknown, a chance to rewrite the narrative of her life. Her first class was a disaster. She tripped over her own feet, collided with her partner, a surprisingly patient man named Arthur, and felt a blush creep up her neck that hadn't been there since her awkward teenage years. She almost quit then and there. Returned to the safety of her meticulously organized condo and her color by numbers. But something stubborn, something she hadn't known was buried deep within her, refused to let her. Maybe it was the memory of her grandmother, a woman who'd emigrated from Poland with nothing but a suitcase and a fierce determination. Maybe it was a whisper of something more, a yearning she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge for decades. So she went back. And back again. Arthur, bless his kind soul, patiently guided her through the steps. He wasn't a professional dancer. He was a retired history teacher with a bad knee and a surprisingly good sense of humor. But he had a passion for tango that was infectious. Slowly, painstakingly, Juniper began to find her footing. Not just on the dance floor, but in life. The tango wasn't just about steps. It was about connection, about trust, about letting go of control and surrendering to the moment. She started seeing parallels between the dance and her past. The rigid structure of the hardware store mirrored the initial strictness of the tango steps. But life, like the tango, wasn't about perfect execution. It was about improvisation, about adapting to unexpected turns, about finding beauty in the imperfection. One evening, weeks into the class, Arthur shared a story. His wife had passed away 5 years earlier. He'd felt utterly lost, adrift in a sea of grief. The tango, he said, had been his lifeline. It had given him a reason to get out of bed in the morning, a connection to something larger than himself. Juniper felt a pang of recognition. She, too, had been adrift, though her grief wasn't for a person lost, but for a life she thought she knew. As they danced, she realized she'd been clinging to the past, to the familiar comfort of her old job, afraid to embrace the uncertainty of the future. The tango forced her to be present, to feel the music in her bones, to respond to the subtle cues of her partner. And in that presence, she found a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this new chapter of her life wouldn't be a decline, but a dance in its own right. Then came the day of the community center's annual showcase. Juniper and Arthur had volunteered to perform. Juniper felt a wave of nausea thinking about it, remembering her initial stumbles and awkwardness. She almost backed out. On the morning of the showcase, Juniper woke to find a note slipped under her door. It was from Arthur. Juniper, it read, remember. It's not about the steps. It's about the story we tell together. His words resonated deep within her. It wasn't about perfection. It was about authenticity, about sharing a moment, about connecting with the audience. Backstage, Juniper's hands trembled as she adjusted her dress, a simple black number she'd bought specifically for the occasion. She glanced at Arthur, who gave her a reassuring smile. "Ready to tell our story?" he asked. As the music began, Juniper felt a surge of adrenaline. She took a deep breath, met Arthur's gaze, and stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding, the audience a blurry sea of faces. But as soon as Arthur took her in his arms, as soon as they began to move, the fear melted away. They weren't professionals. Their steps weren't flawless. But there was a raw honesty in their dance, a vulnerability that resonated with everyone in the room. Juniper felt a lightness she hadn't felt in years. With each step, she was shedding the weight of her past, embracing the possibilities of her future. She wasn't just dancing, she was telling a story of loss and rediscovery, of resilience and hope, of finding rhythm in the unexpected. In the middle of the dance, something remarkable happened. Juniper and Arthur lost their footing. They stumbled, nearly fell. The audience gasped. But then something unexpected occurred. They laughed. Juniper and Arthur both spontaneously laughed. The audience chuckled, too. They recovered, regained their composure, and continued dancing. The stumble, the imperfection, had humanized them, had made their performance even more powerful. At the end of the dance, the audience erupted in thunderous applause. Juniper and Arthur took a bow, hand in hand. Juniper felt tears welling up in her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of joy, of gratitude, of profound, unexpected liberation. After the showcase, a young woman approached Juniper. "That was beautiful," she said, her eyes shining. "I've been feeling lost lately, like I don't know what to do with my life. Your dance gave me hope." Juniper smiled. "Life is a dance, dear," she said. "Sometimes you stumble, sometimes you soar. The important thing is to keep moving, to keep listening to the music, to keep telling your story." The hardware store closing had felt like an ending, a full stop at the end of a long sentence. But it turned out to be a comma, a brief pause before the start of a new, unexpected clause. Juniper didn't become a professional tango dancer. She didn't even become a particularly good one. But she learned something far more valuable. She learned that life wasn't about avoiding stumbles. It was about embracing them, about finding beauty in the imperfections, about having the courage to rewrite your story, no matter your age. She started volunteering at a local elementary school, helping children with their reading. She joined a hiking club and discovered a love for the Wisconsin wilderness. She even took a painting class where she discovered she had a hidden talent for watercolors. Juniper realized that wisdom wasn't about accumulating knowledge. It was about embracing change, about being open to new experiences, about finding meaning in the unexpected. She learned that the detours in life often lead to the most beautiful destinations. And as she danced through her 70s, she discovered that the greatest lessons weren't found in balance sheets or colored by numbers, but in the rhythm of the tango, the laughter of children, and the quiet beauty of a Wisconsin sunset. The real secret to aging gracefully wasn't about fighting the wrinkles or defying the years. It was about embracing the dance with all its imperfections, all its stumbles, all its unexpected joys. It was about finding the rhythm in the detours and discovering that the most valuable lessons often arrive when we least expect them, disguised as a tango lesson or a hardware store closing, or simply the courage to say yes to a new adventure. So the next time you find yourself at a crossroads, when the familiar path disappears and the future seems uncertain, remember, Juniper and the tango. Take a deep breath and embrace the detour. You never know what beautiful lessons might be waiting for you just around the bend. The rhythm of life, like the tango, is always waiting to be rediscovered.